What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kickash Podcast. We are back here today to take a look at episode 3 of the docu-series Mr. McMahon on Netflix. Of course, taking a look in depth at Vince McMahon, his childhood, upbringing, the beginning of WWE, all that good stuff. We are here taking a look at episode 3, like I said, which is focusing on the Screwjob and some scandals, which is such a weird word to classify it as, but some, I guess we'll leave it at that, scandals, different types of situations, to say the least, that Vince found himself in. And then going forward from there, of course, just focusing on episode 3. I was going to combine these episodes, episode 3 and 4, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to stick with it. I've been tempted back and forth. But yeah, no, I'm just gonna knock this episode out here, and then gonna try to record episode 4 a little bit later here as well to get those taken care of and get the whole series wrapped up. Because I finally have had a chance to finish the series, so I want to get everything taken care of and it's sealed with a nice little bow. But with all that being said, we're gonna dive right into episode 3. As always, I want to say thank you guys for checking out the show. I truly appreciate it. If you're watching here on YouTube, feel free to subscribe. You can like or comment on the video, whatever you feel so inclined to do. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at @KakashPodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. And also, I do a live show every Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern time over at Brass Ring Media on YouTube. So definitely subscribe over there and give us a follow and check us out check the guys out during the week. But check me out Saturday morning at 10 a.m. if you like. It got a little spicy. Not a little spicy. Maybe that's a little bit overstating it, but it got a little fun at one point in the comments section. So just yeah, I'll leave it at that just to keep it short and sweet. But yeah, man, I appreciate everyone's support and everyone checking me out over there and then coming over here and vice versa. Just means a lot. It's fun to interact with you guys, so appreciate that. And for the series, we will be continuing with referencing 411mania.com, specifically Robert Lady Jr.'s article. And again, shout out to him. He has done incredible work here, and I love the 411 Mania website overall. It's just very well put together. I like it's easy to navigate, and everything is just divided nicely into the sections. Like it's there's no overrun. It's just, and the ads, like there's not, yes, there's ads, right? Because you need to support your business, of course, but it doesn't kill you. Like it's not like you're on one screen and you can't even navigate through. Just a little personal tidbit there, which I truly appreciate. Just makes someone like me just kind of navigating through here, reading it easier to follow and to move through. So I appreciate that aspect of it as well. But if you guys want to follow along here with me, as always, I'll throw the link in the chat. And I think, and why not? I think, but I know Robert, Mr. Lady had actually reached out and had given thanks in a quick shout out. So I appreciate that. If you are coming back here for episode 3, Mr. Lady, I appreciate that. Was not expecting that, but that was a cool little surprise. So props to you if you are listening to this, and thank you again for reaching out on Twitter and dropping a comment on the previous episode. I appreciate that. But with all that business out of the way, like I said, we will be getting right in here to episode 3. And of course, like I stated earlier, it is titled Screwjob, which we all know very well at this point. And starting off with the article, we left off with Hulk Hogan being pegged by the government as their star witness against Vince McMahon, and then he links his recap of episode 1 and 2 at the links. So definitely check that out. Runtime for this episode is 53:15. These episodes did fly by, in my opinion, and I like that they were almost an hour in length in each episode. It didn't like, and of course there's some ads, depending on what I think package you have or whatever, but excuse me, it's you still get a good amount of content, in my opinion, so I appreciate that. But with continuing with the article, with a title like Screwjob, you may think that this is only about Bret Hart, but we start with Wendy Richter as WWF's ladies champion in 1985. Vince said Wendy was champion and everything was fine for some time, but then she became a problem. He accuses Wendy of not wanting to do business and passed the title on to the next person. So essentially doing business, which is, especially back then in the territory days, that was what you do, that you do business on the way out. You're leaving for a reason, so you do the right thing, essentially. it's kind of like in related to your real world, like, you know, you put in your 2 weeks and you're getting your role and your stuff ready for the next person who's going to replace you. So, but I get it's all about the handling of it. So I get it's completely different in the wrestling world, but to me it was just always kind of interesting why some people were just more hesitant to do business on the way out. And again, we don't know all the ins and outs because we weren't there, but I don't know, it was just always kind of interesting to me. But continuing on, he says he is a script writer, and he being Vince, he says he is a script writer, and the championship is his and not hers. She tells him she won't give it up. I'm going to make you give it, or in Vince quote says, "I'm going to make you give it up." Then, um, it's just yeah, it's just kind of like, come on now, how old are we? I don't know. And I get it too, like, and depending on what he was requesting of her and how he wanted to do it, I get like if she didn't feel it was right for her character or whatever that situation is, I get that, but like on the Vince side to it, it's just one of those things, man. I get it. I'm on kind of both sides, but to be honest with you, I'd lean more a little bit on Vince, depending again on what all the facts were. If it was something ridiculous or embarrassing or demeaning or something like that, then I would get why you'd be hesitant to do so. But like I don't know, it's just one of those things to me. We get to the show at Madison Square Garden where Wendy is defending the title against the Masked Spider, which is Fabulous Moolah, not so Fabulous Moolah. Vince notes you don't fire someone when the crowd is expecting a match because you screw the crowd, which I respect that, I appreciate that. Vince is always thinking. Oh, and Robert says Vince is always thinking of us fans. See, his dad told him to give the fans the match in the ring and then figure it out. So essentially, give us what was advertised, and then you, as a businessman, handle that shit behind the scenes. Long story short, you know. Min says it was really easy, as he told the ref to count to three no matter what. Which again, the referee's going to do what the referee's told to do. You know, but who are they? How are they going to go against what the owner wants them to do? Like they're in a really shitty situation. Wendy notes she lifted her shoulder at one, but the ref counted anyway. She says it was a painful night and she lost her dream. Vince's answer to it not being a fair count was, quote, I don't fight fair, life's not fair, end quote. So, yeah, I'm sure he's used that a lot now. And it's just funny how the tables have turned, allegedly still, you know, but regardless, it's just funny how the tables have turned. Vince said it was just business and nothing personal, but Wendy vowed to. Oh, gotcha. Wendy bowed to him after the match, and he never saw her again. "Quote: There's nothing I wouldn't do for the business," which is Vince. Which that is one thing that you can never dispute. Back to court as Vince is sporting a neck brace as Hulk Hogan is brought in to testify. Hogan notes he and Vince were at each other's throats at the time, so the feds thought Hogan was the perfect witness. And again, just a little callback really quick. This was obviously at the time where Hulk Hogan was no longer with the company with WWF, and he was, God, I'm pretty certain he had already joined WCW at that time, or he was just about to, and he was filming movies and things like that. So it's ironic the timing. Hogan testified that Vince never told him to take steroids and it was his choice. Hogan says he told Vince before he left that they came up together and they would go down together. Dave Meltzer says it caught the prosecutors off guard as that wasn't what they were expecting Hogan to say. Hogan notes he told them what they wanted to hear before the court, but knew what he was going to say, essentially in court. He was going to tell the truth, and the truth was Vince never sold steroids or pushed for wrestlers to take them. Vince says Hogan was crafty as Hogan gave the government a little of what they wanted, but not exactly what they wanted. And Tony Atlas, one of the MVPs throughout the series, Tony Atlas says the feds called him, but he told them he was taking steroids long before Vince. He notes Vince was okay with them doing steroids, but he didn't tell them to take them. Of course, Bret Hart, notes all the guys on roids notes all the guys on roids were main event guys, but he never saw Vince tell anyone to take them. Dave Meltzer says Vince would just tell the guys they needed to go work out. So essentially, it's like one of those things that's implied, you know, like I didn't deliberately tell you to go take steroids, but you need to get, you know, I'm looking to push big guys, wink, wink type thing. And again, if that's what happened, it's still your choice at the end of the day. But I get why you would feel. I completely understand. Not even get. I completely understand why you would feel pressure to do what you need to do to get ahead. and especially back then where you're on the grind 7 days a week. It was much harder to make a living, whereas now we have social media and many more avenues, really, and much more opportunity to make an income. So the guys, not excusing it, but they had to do what they had to do. Um, and a lot of them felt like that was the only way that they'd be at the top. Now, again, it wasn't the only way, because you have guys like Bret Hart who still made it to the top and still were the guy, and obviously we're not on steroids. So it's just one of those things. Um, but to me, it's just wild that it even made it to court. Looking back. Continuing on, though, Vince knew his life was going to change when the verdict came down. Not guilty. Shane McMahon said it was a relief, and Dave notes the case never should have gone to trial as they didn't have enough evidence. Which, wouldn't you believe Vince ever told anyone to take steroids, whether it was just implied, whatever? They didn't have evidence. Like, it was all he said, she said, which is just, and again, why I was just saying it's wild that it even made it to court. Again, do I believe he was completely innocent? Probably not, but it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what's on paper and what's facts. Trust me, I've watched enough court trials and shit to know that if you're gonna go, you gotta have a full deck and you gotta be prepared. And they just weren't. Not that they weren't prepared, but they just came with a deck half full, and it's just kind of, that's why it's perplexing to me that they even took it to that extreme without having more ammo, really. um they needed, back to the article, they needed more than Vince just being a bad guy. Linda said the case proved they didn't have a steroid problem, but Dave says that it proved all their main guys were on steroids. Vince says some people in the government suck. And the federal government suck, which, fair. The trial affected business in a big way as some executives started fleeing. Business was way down, and Dave notes that they were in big financial trouble. Brett says, quote, business wasn't as good as when Hulk Hogan was on top. They were looking for someone to replace Hulk Hogan as the face of WWE. Enter Lex Luger, and Vince says they put the machine behind Lex. Lex was okay, but nowhere near Hulk Hogan. Pritchard says Lex was another in a long train of guys that was trying to fill the shoes of Hulk Hogan, which, to be fair, how could you? Again, your feelings on Hulk Hogan to the side, like how can you fill the shoes of him? You can't. Brett says that Brett says that guy that pulled the sword out of the stone was Bret Hart. Oh, and Robert says, "Oh man, I'm sure people will have be decisive and have fun with that remark." So yeah, I thought that was like, okay. Brett helps usher in the new generation with guys like Razor Ramon, Diesel, and Shawn Michaels at the top of the card. Shawn Michaels says, once you knew it was no longer the Hogan era, it put a question on everything, as it was all up for grabs. Enter Undertaker into the chat. He says, quote, Hulk is gone, so who's going to step up? End quote. Brett says that guys like him and The Undertaker were some of the best wrestlers ever. He was proud to carry the torch for the new generation, and he was the safest guy. He wouldn't get busted at a hotel with an underage girl or found with a bag of cocaine. Fucking love Brett, man. Brett says Vince told him he would be champion for a long time and hold the fort down while they dealt with all the issues. Vince also notes that the Hart family was very interesting. He says Brett didn't have a lot of charisma, but had enough, and it was touch and go at first. Robert says some compliment there, which is, yeah. Over to WCW as Ted Turner is throwing out massive amounts of money to whatever stars he could. Hogan made the move, and Randy Savage followed a few months later. Eric says those two jumping on board made people look at WCW differently. Eric gives his famous story of telling Ted he needed to, and Ted gave the green light. It was only an hour, and Robert notes that it was only an hour the first 6 to 8 months or so, but it's Eric's story. Vince felt they were in trouble when Nitro was announced and was worried they would put them out of business. And again, like, if you listen to any Bruce Pritchard podcasts, he's even mentioned that they were removing water coolers and shit. So it got pretty serious there for a second. Continuing on, WCW Nitro debuts in September of '95, and Eric needs a surprise. Lex Luger shows up one night after working a WWF live show, which was the big like F you to WWF in the first like shot fired, and that was a big deal because he literally went from a WWF event to airing live on WCW and your competitors' complete opposite wrestling program's television show, which is unheard of at that point. To that, obviously, to that scale and to that effect. That was the first shot in the Monday Night War. Eric says Lex was tired of WWF, so he gave him a deal and told him not to let anyone know. Eric says it was a beautiful deal, which I'm sure it was. Vince says all he had with guys was a handshake agreement, and that had always worked, and that quickly changed. Now the big bad Turner organization was throwing money at everyone. We all know the irony of what Ted was doing was the same thing that Vince was doing to the territories back in the 80s. And they even asked him about that at one point, the producers, and I forget exactly what his response was, but Vince was like pretty much like life, like it's life sucks and then you die. That's a quote I'll never forget from him. That wasn't what he said there, but he he just he doesn't care, and he doesn't see the same thing that he's doing to someone else. If it's done to him, he doesn't see the wrong in what he's doing. It's just wild. um it was smart business essentially, and they need to compete with oh that here we go. This is Robert recapping it. Essentially that it was smart business, and they needed to do what they needed to do to compete when Vince does it, but it's a pure evil empire and backstabbers when it goes the other way, which is very, very fitting there. Pritchard says WCW went up them and they looked like the cool show. They being WCW Nitro did. He says Eric was ruthless. Eric wanted to be different from WWF, so he went live every week while Raw was on a taping cycle. He wanted his stories to be more reality based and have more adult characters. Wanted Nitro to be the show where fans never knew. I'm sorry, what would happen. Hogan knew it would get dirty because Vince wants to destroy his competition and eat it. So essentially, Vince or Eric would do shisty shit. There's times where he would have, when WWF was taped, he would have the results, and of course, we all know the story by now. He would go on the air and give out the WWF's results to the matches at the start of WCW Nitro. So you didn't have to. There's no need to turn the channel to see what's going to happen. You already know. Again, we do know it backfired at the end of the streak that WCW had for 83 weeks. When they announced that Mankind, Mick Foley was going to be winning the championship, I think they said it was like 600,000 viewers switched over, which is, sucks to suck sometimes. Karma comes back to you guys, and of course, like it's everything happens for a reason, in my opinion. But I'm sure if he had that one back, he would take that back. But continuing on, we get to Eric giving. Oh, I need to just shut up and continue reading. We get to Eric giving away the results of taped episodes of Raw at the start of Nitro. Shawn Michaels, and then this is a quote: Shawn Michaels beat the guy with a super kick. So you can hear. Was it Eric himself saying? I think it might have been Eric himself saying that quote, which is pretty funny. Vince. Oh, okay. Vince. Whatever. Vince said it hurt them for some time and annoyed him, which I'm sure it did. When Vince is angered, he is going to focus all the more. Eric says that Hogan and Randy Savage told him that no matter what he did, Vince would never sell the effect. Triple H, Undertaker, Heyman all note that Vince never sold it. Don't sell it, never acknowledge the competition is Vince's motto. Bischoff kept pushing it and had Medusa show up on Nitro and dump the WWF women's title in the garbage. Vince finally reacted with this. Robert says the stupid billionaire Ted skits, which I think is just fucking comical. Eric says he showed them to Ted Turner and he laughed his ass off. And then they show a clip of Ted watching, and sure enough, he is dying, laughing, saying the huckster. Vince says it was all in fun, but Kay Kaplofitz, I forget how to pronounce her name rather, shut them down. She was not a fan. Kay says it was distasteful and she didn't like it, even if they were the competitors with Turner. Vince says Kay and Ted were friends, which obviously why she'd be upset. But if Ted doesn't mind, like, I don't know, he's laughing at it. Just chill out, Kay. Pritchard says USA Network was receiving heat from their friends in Turner. He also says they should have They should have been above taking those shots, but those skits were how he pieced together that Razor and Diesel were leaving. He asked them to get involved in the skits, and they said no, which, why would you not want to be involved in that? That seems, he asked them to, okay. And then Robert says that may be weird, or that seems weird, as he doesn't recall any of the actual in-ring talent being used in the skits. But I think, like, wasn't Shawn Michaels, like, oh, no, that's probably wrong. That was a later one. I'd have to go back and check, too. Vince had long conversations with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He realized they were being offered more money for less dates, and that's something that he just couldn't compete with. They were doing what was best for their family. Shawn says professionally he was happy for his friends, but it sucked because he wouldn't be seeing his buddies anymore. Triple H talks about the friendship he and Shawn had with Hall and Nash, which led to, of course, the curtain call in Madison Square Garden. May 1996. It was a live event where Hall and Nash were having their last match in the promotion. Shawn wanted to do something to honor Hall and Nash and cleared it with Vince prior. They were given their blessing as it was important to Shawn, so Vince said it was important to him. After Shawn and Diesel had a cage match, Hall and Triple H, he had faced earlier, came down and all four men embraced in the ring. Old school people were losing their minds as they were breaking kayfabe and exposing the business. Stephanie McMahon says she was in the crowd and part of her thought it was cool, but she figured her dad would be pissed. Cody Rhodes says people his age thought it was cool, but the generation above saw it as breaking the cardinal sin. Undertaker didn't like it, and Bret Hart says they killed they scrolled up a little bit. They killed wrestling that day. It's not wrestling anymore. It's entertainment. We get a lesson about kayfabe as it was a carnival term and is the fiction that is produced by the con artist, which is, I don't know. Triple H says it is keeping the illusion that it is real. Good guys stay with good guys and never mingle with the bad guys. Taker says he came up where he lived and believed the mindset. He always wanted to cast doubt with the audience, protected the business and his character all the time. And they even show clips of him going like out in public, and he was all in complete black, sunglasses, everything, like just like a complete goth looking guy, which you would think, if you look at that character, obviously he's a human being, but you would expect him to look like that in just in real life. And in regards to the curtain call, like it was overblown, but I get at that time it was completely like jarring, right? And shocking to them. But if Vince cleared it, I don't see the big deal. And I didn't even know. Well, I learned that recently, but for the longest time, I didn't even realize that he had knew about it and cleared it. So I don't know, just bitching about something to bitch. In my opinion, at that point. Triple H says it was becoming antiquated and brings up the newsletters and dirt sheets. It was about 1997. Oh, okay. Robert says it was about 1997 when he got online and started getting into the IWC. Vince McMahon admits he let it happen, but he can't let it happen again. Kevin and Scott were gone, so they can't be punished, but Shawn was a WWF champion, so Triple H had to take all the punishment. He says he was supposed to win the King of the Ring that year, and all that went away. Triple H told Vince the biggest reaction of the night was that moment, and told him that the world was changing and they needed to change with the times. Vince told him he understood, but the time wasn't now. Triple H had to learn to eat shit and like it for a while, and he did. May 27th, 1996. Robert Leedy says Memorial Day and his 15th birthday. Scott Hall shows up on Nitro, and wrestling is never the same. Eric says he had the idea for the invasion for some time, but could never figure out how to make it work until Scott and Kevin came along. They show a clip of Kevin Nash powerbombing Bischoff off of a stage as well, which is pretty cool. Eric says it was a hell of an idea, and Vince sued them over it. WWF's claim was that Eric was stealing their intellectual property, as Hall was being as close to Razor Ramon without actually calling him that as he possibly could, which is kind of true. Vince says it was stealing and not the right way to do business, which Eric Bischoff laughs and says stealing is in the eye of the beholder. Vince went into a sympathetic babyface mode and was whining like a little schoolgirl. Damn. Vince whined that Ted was using his resources in a predatory fashion to put a family business out of business, which is just fucking laughable. Eric says it's Eric is said it's supposed to be Eric is in all of his glory by mocking Vince's claims. He then points out that Vince was raiding the territories, and Dave Meltzer brings back in the day, right? And Dave Meltzer brings that up by noting that it is what Vince by noting that is what in 84 and 85. Oh, I guess essentially, but that's what Vince was doing in 84 and 85. Um, yeah. The producer brings this point up to Vince, and okay, cool. So we get to it. Thank you, Robert. The producer brings this point up to Vince, but he says it wasn't the same. Quote: Ted's philosophy was to hurt his competitor, and that's not mine. I wanted to compete. Come on, bro. The producer pushes back, and Vince says it may sound hypocritical, but he was looking out for himself. He rambles on about what he says may be different than what he thinks, and which just makes no fucking sense. Like what? Um, it was just fucking dumb. I just didn't understand what he was saying there. But yeah, credit to the producer for pushing back there for sure. Pritchard says the real turning point was Bash at the Beach '96, which here we fucking go. If you weren't around, I feel sorry for you, which I was too young at that point, which is sad. The third man mystery is one of the greatest angles in the history of everything ever, is what Robert says. The reveal was the greatest heel turn of all time as Hulk Hogan dropped a leg on Randy Savage. Cody Rhodes was there and says it was surreal to see the biggest babyface of all time turning to the dark side. Which, yeah, I'm sure it was like wild seeing it live. Cody says he learned about too much heat for the first time that night. Fans pelted the ring with garbage, and they cover a fan rushing the ring and getting decked by Nash and stopped by Hall, which is great. Eric says it was the most amazing moment in his career, and if you watch any of the 83 weeks live streams that he does on YouTube, you can see that picture hanging on his wall, which is pretty cool. Sorry, I had to get a quick swig there, but again, Canada Dry. If you need someone to sponsor, just saying. It's been way too much money on you guys. The producer asks Vince if they ever considered turning Hogan heel. Vince says he and Terry wanted to keep Hogan as a good guy. David Shoemaker says every piece of trash was thrown in the ring. And that was like a good brick for WCW, and Vince missed out on a chance to make a ton of money. Hogan says most fans forgot he broke into the business as a bad guy and could handle the role. And then he continues on to, they showed the promo that he was cutting. Hogan wanted to prove a point to Vince and show that he could do this without him. Vince is very much business is business, but with Hogan, it was personal. Pritchard says that was the moment in time that shit changed. Which, no shit. The NWO was born. And yeah, he was like, what I would do to go back and then relive this, which, yeah, I'm sure, I wish I was alive. I was alive. God. I wish I was old enough at the time to witness it live, is what I meant. WCW had the cool factor, and people started seeing the WWF as less than. Taker says the NWO was cool, and WCW started kicking their ass every week. Eric Bischoff said, how many weeks? 83 weeks, which is, yeah, there's his show. Booker T says they felt there was no way that they could lose, and Vince says it was a war, and he wasn't sure if they could even stay in business. Hogan says once they committed to going to war after Vince, Vince was all in. The idea was thrown out for Eric to be part of the NWO as an on-air character, and it was a stroke of genius. Eric took that role perfectly and made all the sense in the world. And it made all the sense in the world for the story of the NWO taking over the company. Purchase said it was always a war against Turner and not Bischoff. Which, no. Eric took note of that as well and understood why Vince wouldn't say that Eric Bischoff was kicking his ass every week. The story had to be the evil billionaire trying to take down Vince's family business. It is a family business, but it's not like a little mom and pop shop. Like, it's just that just kills me, bro. The producer asks Vince when he first heard about Eric Bischoff. Vince says he didn't realize this, but Eric auditioned to be a stick man like Gene Okerlund. We see Eric's audition tape from June 19th, 1990, and he has asked who his hero is, and ironically enough, he says his hero is Hulk Hogan. Just wow, but in 2020 hindsight, right? Eric says he was disappointed he didn't get the job, and Vince says he didn't regret not hiring Eric and says he doesn't regret anything in his life, which I believe it as well, and maybe you should. Vince goes back to, which I don't know, I'm not going to get out on that tangent, but I'm kind of funny about regrets too. But I mean, I haven't done nearly half the shit that Vince has done, so maybe I would regret shit, but I digress. Vince goes back to Eric just using former WWF talents to win battles. Vince decided he needed to keep his talent and offered Bret the infamous 20-year deal. Vince says it was a bad business deal the moment he signed off on it, and his ego told him that he needed to keep Bret, but the inside was telling him himself that he could just create new stars. Shane says Vince was telling Bret where the loopholes were so he could get out and get a better deal from WCW, which is pretty stand up, like he designs the contract, right? So he would know what loopholes there are. So it was pretty nice that he was kind of giving him, like, hey, do this, this, and this. Bret takes the deal with WCW, but is the WWF champion at the time. Flashback to Wendy, right? How we started the episode. Vince starts with how he can't let Bret go to WCW with the WWF title, and Shane says Bret had different ideas. Shawn says that Bret didn't care about losing the title, but just couldn't lose it to Shawn. Bret says, quote, Shawn was a real dick at that time, and it's just the truth. Which is great. Just fucking great. I just love Bret, man. But we get into the Shawn-Bret rivalry and how they're poking at each other. Shawn admits he was a prick, and we hear the Sunny Days promo, which I love. Again, guys, it may be an unpopular pick, but I've always been more of a Shawn guy. It's just, I don't know, whatever in me, I just fucking love him. I like Bret, probably better in the ring, right? No, probably not even a question there, but just different, in my opinion. I don't know, man. Shawn, overall, I'm not gonna get into that right now, but yeah, man, I've always been more of a Shawn guy. Shawn Michaels, the phrase, Shawn Michaels guy, Paul Heyman guy, that kind of thing. Bret says he came close to punching Shawn in the face as he told national TV he was banging Sunny when he was a married man. Vince's thoughts were that it was good for television, which, yeah, of course he did. Then we fast forward to Survivor Series 97. Bret doesn't want to lose the title to Shawn, which, like I was saying earlier, it's wild. Like, come on. Like, I get it. Like, morally, you have your principles and stuff like that. I get it. But you got to do business, man. Like, that's what always was just kind of standing out to me. Like, you got to put the business first. And that should have just been the end all be all for me, in my opinion. But it's just me on the outside. And I didn't have the emotional strings attached, essentially. Triple H had a phone call with Shawn and Vince, and Triple H is the one that said, fuck that, if he won't do it for him. Yeah, I believe that. But there's also, like Robert Lee referenced here, a Dark Side of the Ring episode where Jim Cornette and Vince Russo took credit, which is fucking laughable to me. Shawn says he met Vince when he was 23 years old and has spent more time with him than his own father. He gets emotional as Vince put up with him when he was in a bad place. His loyalty is to Vince, and he was going to do whatever he wanted. Pritchard says he was told day of the show it would be a clusterfuck finish with nobody winning. That worked for Bret, but he also knew what happened to Wendy. He never took his eye off of Shawn as he was ready to truly fight him if needed. He says the match was a great match. Shawn puts his sharpshooter on wrong and Bret helps him get it in correctly. Then that's when Vince screams, ring the fucking bell. And that's when all hell breaks loose. It's just wild. You can even see fans in the front row like getting all pissed off and shit. It was great. Pritchard is screaming on the headset wondering why the bell rung. Vince wanted to be at ringside so he could know what happened. And again, props to him for doing that. I took back what is mine. And then Bret then hits the mother of all spit shots right in Vince's eye, which have been disgusting, bro. Like, just, it was so well done, but disgusting. And then we see Bret smashing monitors and running WCW infamously in the air with his finger. And then he breaks down as he talks about how consoling Owen was to him at that time, which is so rough, man. It's, the page is kind of spazzing on me. Here we go. Bret bled and worked holidays and kids' birthdays for 14 years for Vince. He gave Vince everything he could, and none of that meant anything to him. We get into some Wrestling with Shadows footage, which is a great documentary if you haven't seen. It's just wild that we even got that footage. It's just so, the timing is just ironic. As Bret asks Shawn if he was in on it, and Shawn denies with God as his witness. Triple H and Shawn both say that Vince told them to both deny, as he wanted all the heat to come to him. We see Julie Hart, Brett's then wife and now ex-wife at the time, well, then wife, now ex-wife, run down Triple H and tell him God was going to strike him down for lying. Now, 20 years later, Triple H is running the show, which is wild. She then tells Hunter, what comes around goes around, and Undertaker says it was chaos and many of the boys were pissed. Vince says he felt he owed Brett something and was okay if Brett wanted to hit him. Triple H says he left the room because he didn't want to see Vince get punched. He says he, being Vince, walked up to Brett with his hands down, and Brett says he didn't give him a free shot. He calls that story bullshit. Which again, whatever. Like if either Vince gave him a free shot or if Brett took it, he still got it. They tied up in a Brett was saying they tied up like a wrestling match and everyone was ready to separate them, so Brett realized he could only get off an uppercut, but he still got it square. Like Vince had a shiner right on his eye. Undertaker has no idea how the punch got through. Brett says it's probably the best thing I ever did and he deserved it. It's fucking great. Vince says he got a concussion, was limping around and had a pretty good shiner. Taker felt bad for everyone, but Vince had to do what was best for business. Vince says that was the Montreal screw job and he doesn't regret any of it. Okay. I get it now. Triple H says it was a shift and created a seismic change in the business. And the controversy after led to the Mystic McMahon character, which we all know of. Triple H says in the middle of chaos, genius came of it. Archive footage of Vince claiming that this isn't the final nail in the WWF and they're just getting started. And that's the end of the recap there of the episode specifically, because then it dives into the credits. I'm just reading through here on the final thoughts for Mr. Leedy. But yeah, I'm actually gonna read this. So this episode went away from the criminal and despicable scandals and instead focused on Vince's war with Turner and his dealings with wrestlers that didn't want to do what he wanted. In that sense, these are low on the Vince scumbag moves list, which I agreed. There are people out there that have had their fill on Montreal and never want to hear about it again. Even with what they covered, they left a ton out and it just made it seem like Brett didn't want to lose, and that was that. They didn't touch on him offering to lose to someone else or giving up the title or Brett having reasonable creative control. Fair point. So Brett had in that contract reasonable creative control so that if he didn't want to do something, essentially that he had wiggle room and he had say so. And then Robert just goes on to say, I get that Brett's issues were with Shawn and his telling Brett he would never do a job for him. I have a feeling Montreal is going to be talked about for another 30 years, which it probably will be. And he loved them pointing out the hypocrisy of Vince whining about what Eric was doing to him, and that seemed to fluster Vince, which I fucking love too. Shout out to the producers for that. But next time we get, and on the next episode, we're diving into the Attitude Era, which should be fun. So again, guys, thank you so much for checking out the recap here. Thank you again to Robert Leedy Jr. and 411mania.com for the transcription. I truly appreciate that. And until next time, guys, feel free to follow me on Twitter at @KagashPodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. But yeah, until next time, thank you so much. And stay safe out there, guys. Enjoy some wrestling.